From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Here we go again. Have you been interviewed by law enforcement?
You have to talk to my attorney.
A federal and state investigation swirling around the former House Finance Chairman Ray Gallison. The vast majority of the details of the probe are still shrouded in mystery, but a Target 12 examination of a nonprofit he ran is raising questions about how tax dollars given out through legislative grants was used. And another investigation into a lawmaker is reviving talks of strengthening the Ethics Commission. This week on Newsmakers, Republican State Representative from Portsmouth, Dan Reilly, Independent State Representative from Block Island, Blake Filippi, and Executive Director of Common Cause Rhode Island, John Marion. Hello and welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. John Marion will be joining us on the second half of the program, but joining me now, as always, from WPRI.com, Ted Nesi. Rep. Reilly, Rep. Filippi, thank you very much for joining us on the program. I want to note that Representative Reilly, as I said, is a Republican, and Representative Filippi, who's an independent, caucuses with the Republicans. We did put out an invitation to a little more than a half dozen Democrats who all declined our invitation to come on the show for various reasons. Gentlemen, I want to get some quick nuts and bolt questions out of the way regarding the Gallison investigation. Feel free to just both of you jump in if you, as I ask these. Have either of you been contacted by law enforcement?
No.
No.
Do you know firsthand of any lawmakers that have been questioned by law enforcement?
No.
So the Speaker acknowledged rumors were swirling about Gallison in the lead up to his resignation. Had you guys been hearing anything at all, Dan?
No, and I'm on the Finance Committee with him, and we just started doing bills. We got through the budget process. We came back from break. Last week was pretty busy. And everything seemed really normal, which is why it was that much more surprising this week when I found out. But there was no rumor, no hint of anything going on.
Speaker Mattiello said Gallison maybe hadn't quite been himself in these final weeks before his resignation. Did you? I know you're this close as a minority party lawmaker, but did you notice anything different about him?
I can't say that I did, and I didn't see him in private meetings like I'm sure the Speaker did. But yeah, I didn't see anything
Blake,
different at all.
did you hear anything in the lead up at all? This just caught you off guard?
I echo what Rep. Reilly said. I had no indication that anything was amiss.
So what was your reaction when you found out? How did you find out, and what did you think?
I found out through Twitter, late on Monday night, I believe, and I think the same shock that everyone else has, and just a lot of unanswered questions. I really don't know what happened. I don't think many of us do. And I think more pieces are coming out.
Well, we have to get an uncomfortable subject out of the way, because I got to tell you, everybody's asking about this one, so I have to put it to you guys. We've reported that law enforcement sources say part of the investigation includes allegations of prostitution, and people are wondering, does that reach into the State House in any way? Are you guys aware of anything on that?
No, to answer your question, and one of the surprising things about this to me is we're familiar with the State House. I think a lot of people recognize it's a building full of politicians. There aren't a lot of secrets there. I guess there are a lot more than I may have thought, we may have thought. But I never heard the slightest hint or rumor of anything like this going on. So, we have the same information that the media has at this point. So I really don't know where that goes. But it's something that it's not like, now you're connecting the dots in your head and you're saying, oh, that makes sense. I couldn't tell you where any of this goes. I've never heard any of it before.
I assume same answer.
It's the same, and it's a complete surprise.
Yeah.
I was talking to another minority party lawmaker privately on Tuesday's session, and this person was saying, and you've heard it from a number of people, that you all have political differences among lawmakers, but none of you want lawmakers' reputations to be resigning in scandal with talk of prostitution in the air. I mean, what does this do? Republicans, maybe you think you can make political hay out of it, but still, is it frustrating, the reputation that this is creating for lawmakers?
We're lawmakers first, and we're partisans second, and we're a member of an institution, and we're all. You saw the room on Tuesday after the Democratic caucus. It was like a funeral. And unfortunately, it's not the first time I've been there when there's been an issue with a member. This time it seems different, though. There's this air hanging over the chamber, and I think it's because people realize we're taking a really bad reputational hit. It's not like we're always the most popular people for a variety of reasons, but it's one thing to tick off people because of the budget or a bill that you think's the right move, but other people don't. This is something entirely different. People are right to be angry. They're right to be concerned. And we're angry and concerned because it tarnishes their reputation. And it's a job that we take seriously and we invest a lot of time and effort into, and we don't want to see our efforts diminished by something like this.
But you're an independent. You know, do you find you can get separation by saying, hey, I'm not part of the supermajority of the Democrats, I'm on my own? Or do you think it goes down even to folks like you who are on the other side?
I think it sullies the entire body. But I think we have to remember that, you know, Representative Gallison, or former Representative Gallison, he just occupied a seat. It wasn't his seat; it's the people's seat, and you know, they have the opportunity now to put someone else in there. And I think the body's going to go on, but it definitely is a hit. And there's a lot of good people in that room who do good work every day. And it's unfortunate that when an individual makes a grave mistake, that's what everyone thinks about.
Dan referenced the Democratic caucus, the Speaker met with the Democrats in a caucus right before the resignation, or announcing the resignation of the full chamber. Do you know what the Speaker said to the caucus in behind those closed doors? I know you're not in there, you caucus with the Republicans, but stuff tends to work its way around the State House. Do you know what he told them?
I mean, I have not heard. One thing I have noticed, the Democrat caucus is pretty effective of keeping what's said in their caucus between them. So I would respectfully suggest you ask someone in the Democrat caucus.
And of course we tried more than half a dozen times. Yeah.
Let's talk about legislative grants. As I said in the intro to the program, we don't know all the aspects of where the law enforcement investigation is going, but the media has certainly been taking a hard look at some of the money that has gone to a nonprofit that Rep. Gallison, former Rep. Gallison, ran. So we have to point out to everybody there are two kinds of grants: community service grants, those appear in the budget, and then there are straight legislative grants. Community service grants tend to be larger. I think there was about $12 million in the latest budget of those. And then when you think of the straight legislative grants, we all think of little leagues or youth hockey programs, something like that. And I think there was about $2 million worth of those. But look, they're under the microscope. You hear a lot of people saying, just get rid of them. It's just a trough for legislators. What do you guys think? Should they stay or should they go? Dan?
Well, I think the legislative grant should be voted on and appropriated line item by line item. And I think community service grants, there may be a few that have a purpose, in which case they should also be voted on and in the budget that we vote on. The rest of them, I think, they really are a slush fund. They're a big slush fund. With legislative grants, and in full disclosure, I have participated in legislative grants, not in my first term, but in this past term. I have given out several to groups, and it was always not because you got one last year. It's they come to me with a specific project. I think the largest one was over $3,000, but they want to rebuild a bathroom at a park or something. All right, I'll give it to them for that. That being said, that should be voted on. It shouldn't be an application that I submit to the Speaker's office, which is the current system. To his credit, he's never turned around and said, "Oh, I got your application. What are you going to do for me?" Which is why I decided to submit those applications. But hands down, they should be voted on in the budget. The community service grants, to be honest with you, it sounds very ignorant as a member of the Finance Committee, I see them in the technical appendix, so I knew that they were there. I thought they were always inserted by executive agencies as their version of legislative grants, and it's becoming apparent that lawmakers were using them more as earmarks than anything else.
So you didn't even know how they function?
How they function or how they got there. I knew they were there, but I thought they were inserted by the governor's staff, not by individual legislators.
Blake?
My opinion is, I don't think that they should be in the budget. I think they must be in the budget. Article 6, Section 11 of our state constitution requires a 2/3 vote of both houses of the General Assembly for any private or local appropriation. And I think that can be interpreted as requiring a specific appropriation within the budget. And if not a specific appropriation within the departmental budgets, there should be a line item that says grants, private grants. None of that is in there in the vast majority of cases. So I personally feel, and maybe I differ with some of my colleagues on this, that both the legislative grants and the departmental grants, the community service grants, are constitutionally suspect.
But is that going to be enough? I mean, community service grants are in the budget, and we have them under scrutiny now in funding AEP, which is Gallison's nonprofit.
Well, I would say in the
vast, is that enough transparency, Blake?
I would say in the vast majority of them, they're not specifically line itemed in the budget. You know, a lot of them are paid out of the general fund of these individual departments. And because that is a private appropriation that the General Assembly didn't approve, I believe that there's a major constitutional problem according to Article 6, Section 11 of our state constitution.
But there's also, I don't believe, anyone who would have standing in court to challenge that.
That's
right?
the problem. In, I think, 2008, Bob Watson brought a case to challenge the legislative grant program. Nick Gorham was his attorney, and the court said, you know, as an individual taxpayer, you don't have standing, the ability to bring a claim, and so it would have to be by the governor or any one of the general officers seeking to declare that those grants are unconstitutional. Or the governor could seek requests for an advisory opinion from the Supreme Court, or either house of the General Assembly could request an advisory opinion from the Supreme Court on the constitutionality of this program. So I would suggest maybe they should.
Dan, the Speaker's office told me for a story we did Wednesday, he misspoke speaking to reporters on Tuesday night when he suggested to us his chief of staff discovered Gallison's problems when he went down to see him in the House Finance Committee to get him to reschedule a canceled fundraiser. They now say the Speaker's staff only does political work off state time, etc. There are a lot of people who don't believe that, who think that there's a lot of mixing of that. Where do you come down?
Well, I can't. I mean, they're on the third floor. We're on the first floor. That's probably by design, so I can't speak to where his staff are and what they do. I can say this, as members of the minority caucus, or as a member, and Blake is a member because he caucuses with us, we don't have access to the vast majority of staff who serve, you know, the majority and leadership. And that's by design, and, you know, they're not bullying us. But you know, we have a staff of 6 in our office, and they're strictly apolitical. They're busy enough dealing with policy and you know, constituent stuff. You know, you'll see staff at fundraisers and things like that off state time, and that's the only time I can really speak to them. If I interface during the day, it's really in my role as a legislator, and they're not helping me raise money, let's put it that way.
And all our staff has been trained, and we've been trained that as soon as the conversation becomes political, that they remove themselves from the conversation.
Let's make this conversation political. I want to talk about politics. I want to talk about Donald Trump. You know, he's presumed to be the Republican nominee for president. Dan, you're a Republican, and I think you were a Rubio guy, right?
And Kasich.
Okay,
you're the badger death.
Are you going to fall in lockstep behind Donald Trump now? Are you going to vote for him if he is on the ballot in November?
Well, you know, I don't know. I think Speaker Ryan probably said what I was thinking best yesterday when he said that you know, he has a lot. Donald Trump has a lot to demonstrate. I think, particularly to elected officials who know what it's like to interface with voters and to run real races for office. I don't think he's run a terribly serious campaign. Obviously victorious. You know, you can't say he wasn't. But I have a lot of concerns, and that is why I endorsed Senator Rubio. I was a delegate for him on the ballot. I didn't get a lot of votes because he had dropped out before Rhode Island's election. And then I supported Governor Kasich because I think it's important we have a serious candidate. This will be the first time in, I think, our nation's history where both parties are poised to nominate people who have underwater favorability ratings. So I don't know what that's going to mean for our national election in November, but I can tell you he does not reflect my views. But I think there's a big caveat there, which is I don't know what his views are. Because they seem to change all the time. And I'm not big on voting for someone who has every position on every issue.
You're an independent, Blake. What do you think? What do you make of Trump's rise?
Well, I think it goes in his rise, along with Bernie Sanders' rise, I think shows the discontent with the ruling class establishment in both parties. And I think in many respects, the Democrat establishment and the Republican establishment have similar beliefs. When it comes to campaign finance, no one's even attempted to fix Citizens United. When it comes to international relations, I think the establishment in both parties has promoted an imperialistic policy, especially in the Middle East. So I think you're seeing a rejection of the establishment in both parties, and frankly, I'm happy to see that, because I think we do need a political revolution in this country, and my belief is that we should have a political revolution seeking limited government and classical liberal principles of property rights and small government. And I would just urge everyone out there to maybe take a look at the likely libertarian candidate for president, Gary Johnson.
That an endorsement?
No, it's not an endorsement. It's not an endorsement because he hasn't gotten the endorsement yet from the Libertarian Party. Two-term governor of New Mexico, highly successful businessman, and he believes in keeping government's hands out of our bodies, our bedrooms, and our wallets. And because Rhode Island likely will go blue, we here have the ability, I think, to take a position that doesn't have to go red or blue. We can say, you know what, let's look at a third party, and I think Gary Johnson is a man who actually exhibits a lot of values that this state has.
I want to, Dan, we talked, go back to the General Assembly for a sec. We talked about you're on the Finance Committee, and you've been pushing for a little while now for taking out the income tax in Rhode Island on veterans' pensions. Big issue on Aquidneck Island, a part of where you're from. I hear about it all the time, too. Speaker Mattiello, who obviously has perhaps even more influence now over the budget than he did a few days ago, said, quote, he said that would assist lifetime military officers, career officers. I think there might be some veterans groups that would actually prefer us to utilize any resources we might have on programs that directly assist enlisted veterans, not the well-to-do officers, military officers. What's your reaction?
Yeah, well, I've never met a veterans group that would suggest that. I think he misspoke. I hope he misspoke. We had the hearing in finance on these bills the other night, and we heard from all the veterans groups directly and many veterans who came in to testify. And they made it very clear, including enlisted. They said focusing on enlisted versus officer because of the way their pensions are calculated would not result in any meaningful savings. That's not how you think of state employees or public employees and how their pensions are calculated. They said that that's not how it works. General Centracchio was there, and he said when he retired, his sergeant major actually retired at a higher rate of pay because he served more active duty days. So I think that's a flawed logic. I think he misspoke. I hope he misspoke. When we fix this problem for veterans, I hope we do it for everyone. And I'll just add, if we did it for all veterans, officers, and enlisted, it's about 6.6 million. I say we eliminate the community service grants at 11.5 million, and we still have money.
Well, you could keep almost half of them. You could still do your bill.
Exactly. Exactly.
Rep Reilly, Rep Filippi, thank you very much for joining us on the program. When we come back, our guest for the second half, John Marion from Common Cause Rhode Island. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my left, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi, and our guest on the second half of the program is the executive director from Common Cause Rhode Island, John Marion. John, good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Let's talk about legislative grants. You heard a couple of proposals from both Rep Reilly and Rep Filippi there. I want just focusing on the community service grants. Again, these tend to be the larger ones, and they are under the microscope in the wake of the Gallison probe. They are put into the budget. Is that transparency enough?
No, not the way they're put into the budget.
Explain that.
So in full disclosure, I looked at the list you put online. My wife's an employee of a $55 million organization that gets a grand total of $18,000 in the community service grant.
She's a doctor, though, right? Not like a lobbyist or something.
No. Yeah, she's a physician at the largest community health center group in the state. But surprise to her, surprise to me, they get 18
Very
grand.
cautious disclosure, but we appreciate it nonetheless,
But that's
John.
going to be my point, right? Which is, as Dan said, he's a member of House Finance. They see these in a slideshow about a technical appendix of a departmental budget. If you look in the document, the budget document that comes out, first from the governor's proposed budget and then the House Finance revision of it, you're not going to see X number of dollars for Y group. You're not going to find it in there, to the best of my knowledge. And I may be wrong, but that's what I've been told and what I've discovered. That's not acceptable, right? So people need to be able to know how the money's being spent, whether Blake Filippi's right and that it's unconstitutional. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, I can't say that. But at a bare minimum, groups are getting tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, going on for decades. Some of these things have just rolled over decade after decade. There has to be a bare level of transparency there. And it's got to start, the governor needs to do it in her budget, and then the House needs to do it when they come out with their budget. That's what we were demanding over a decade ago about legislative grants, the other type of grant. And we started to see some transparency there. But obviously, we need to see more transparency.
Should those be in the budget, you think?
So, absolutely.
But wouldn't the budget just be, you'd have lists and lists and lists of little league teams and whatever, and it would be massive.
I mean, the budget, the budget already is massive, right? And so it's going to be bigger, but it's going to be more transparent. And so people can focus in on these items and say, that shouldn't be in there. And more importantly, they're going to have to vote on everything, right? So right now there's a lack of accountability because there's no vote. And so you can't go to your legislator and say, I don't like that you voted for a grant for that, because they didn't vote for a grant for that. They voted for the DEM budget, right? They didn't vote for a grant for Save the Bay getting an appropriation in the form of one of these grants.
So whenever we have Scandal Week at the State House, you get very busy. I couldn't reach you a couple times because you had different reporters talking to you. Does anything surprise you anymore after a number of years heading up Common Cause with these kind of scandals, or you just assume every year or two, every few months, whatever, we're going to have these things pop up and it's just part of Rhode Island politics at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. Listen, it happened long before I got here, long before Common Cause got here. There are quotes from the colonial days about Rogues Island. It doesn't surprise me. Every one of these has a different twist. This is actually in some ways unfolding to be a much more classic scandal. It's about money and about use of position to get money, maybe, even though it started with something more salacious. And in that way, it reflects a lot of what we've seen in the past, where people use their position in the assembly to enrich themselves or people associated with them. It doesn't surprise me. It's human nature, right? People, people have greed, people have avarice, and they do things. We need to build systems to, A, make sure the public knows about how people are behaving so they can judge them on election day, and B, if they abuse that power, get them out of there. And that's why we support a strong ethics commission. That's why we support strong campaign finance laws, so people can see the flow of influence and decide for themselves at the polling place.
That does sort of dovetail into the conversation about ethics commission that that's re-energized now this week, and Speaker Mattiello says he's about to file his ethics bill. What's it going to look like? How will it address the Supreme Court decision that ruled they have no oversight over the legislature?
Yeah, so we don't know. So Majority Leader DeSimone said yesterday that it's going to come Tuesday. I have not seen a draft. I've heard ideas that they're throwing around, but until you see a draft, you don't.
What should
ideas
it look like?
Are just.
So
what it should look like
before that. So they have not sought Common Cause's buy-in for the bill coming out Tuesday. You have not been approached.
I've had discussions with the House leadership staff about what we want out of a bill, and I've been very forceful about what we want out of a bill, and I'll answer your question about that. They have not given me a bill and said, is this good enough?
So it's coming Tuesday, and as of Friday, it's not been shown to Common Cause to see if you'll endorse it?
No, not yet.
Is it possible Common Cause would not endorse a bill that comes out on Tuesday?
Oh, absolutely. So, all my discussions have just been discussions. Again, until you see something on paper and you know where we're talking about the state constitution. Every comma matters. The placement of a comma matters because it's going to be in there and it's going to be interpreted by courts for generations. And so you can't really just sort of orally negotiate something without having it on paper.
So answer that question, what would you like to see?
Yeah, so what we want to see, when this all started in 2009, the state Supreme Court stripped the Ethics Commission oversight of the General Assembly on a 3-to-1 vote. But the majority opinion said, listen, this problem can be solved, and they used the term, by a sufficiently explicit constitutional amendment. And what they meant was you can't sort of muddy it up with all sorts of other ideas. You have to be very clear what you're doing, and the language has to be very clear. And what it has to do is it has to provide a limited repeal of what's called the speech and debate clause. And this is what the Supreme Court decided overrode the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission. It's an older part of the Constitution that provides a broad immunity for legislators acting as legislators. And what we want is just a limited repeal of that so that the Ethics Commission can investigate and adjudicate these things. Still would be in place. You couldn't file a civil suit against your legislator. We're not going to lift their blanket immunity. We just want the Ethics Commission to be able to get in there. So could it be
in your view, would it be to get what Common Cause has been asking for all these years, would it be a simple fix?
I think it would be a fairly simple fix, yes. We've had a proposal out there since 2010. that is a very, very simple fix. There have been counter proposals, particularly out of the Senate, which are much more complicated. I don't think what we'll see out of the House is just that simple fix. I think it will be the simple fix plus some other things. There are some other outstanding issues about how people are appointed to the commission and things like that that might get settled.
We've been talking a lot about the House, but we've had and we only have a minute left, we've had the Senate President on the show, and she has not been a fan of the Ethics Commission, just to boil it down. I mean, do you see any hope that it would get to the other chamber?
Yeah, I mean, I think she, I wouldn't say she's not a fan of the Ethics Commission. I would put it as she's
had separation of powers issues.
Yeah, she's had separation of powers issues, and I hope those can be settled in whatever comes out, which would maybe alleviate her concerns.
Do you get the sense that something's going to pass this year?
I get a sense that we're at a place we haven't been in my 7 years. Yeah.
Interesting.
Strike while the iron is hot.
Yeah. I mean, it's unfortunate. Listen, the vast majority of people up there are doing good things. It's unfortunate it takes something like this for them to realize that we need to have strong ethics laws.
John Marion from Common Cause Rhode Island, thank you very much. If you missed any of the program, it's online, WPRI.com. Get the podcast on iTunes. For Ted Nisi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.